Hi, this is Hannah Nyron with EdTech Times, and today I'm speaking with Frank Britt, CEO of Penn Foster. Hi, Frank. How are you?
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Frank, can you tell me in a couple of sentences what Penn Foster does?
Penn Foster is a education institution and an upskilling platform. So we focus on helping middle skilled adults in high growth occupations up their skills with the ultimate goal of higher income mobility and better employability.
So, how long has Penn Foster been around?
That's a good question. The original Penn Foster was known as the International Correspondence School and has a very iconic, storied history. It was the first correspondence school in the history of the United States. So the year after Sears sent out the first catalog by mail, the following year, this fellow Thomas Foster sent out the first catalog for going to school by mail because there wasn't adequate training for middle skilled adults, even back in the 1890s. And so through its storied history, Penn Foster's educated more adults than any other institution in the history of the United States. 10% of all GIs in World War II. It was one of the first schools in the United States for women. It has a very, very storied history. Fast forward to the present, in 2007, we changed the name to Penn Foster. Didn't feel like correspondence school might be the right way to brand in the 21st century. And so since that time, we've obviously digitized and contemporized. So now we view ourselves as an upskilling platform for the middle skill, but we have a very rich heritage of serving that middle skill cohort.
Wow, that is. You might have invented the industry.
I think there's actually some truth to that. I mean, I think if you trace back the lineage, the idea of self-paced learning and being able to go to school on a remote basis, obviously prior to the technology we all could become accustomed to, I think actually Thomas Foster was legitimately make that claim.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, tell me about what you're doing today. I know you have this long history, but what are the most important things that you're working on today in today's economy and today's educational system?
Yeah, so we always say we're not defined by our history, we're defined by what we're going to do in the future. What we're ultimately trying to make a dent in is this middle skill crisis that employers talk about, that you read about in the paper all the time. We think if you look at the skills gap in the United States, there's always been a skills gap in any modern economy because the rate of innovation means that there are new capabilities, new skills, and someone needs to be trained up to do that. And correspondingly, there are people who no longer have the right skills, and therefore they need to be upskilled to remain relevant in the workforce. So we sit at the nexus between education and employment around that middle skill cohort. There's about 160 million people who are adults that work in the United States. 80 million or so would be considered middle skilled, either defined by their wage and or by their education attainment up to the community college. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring solutions to consumers directly who are in that middle skilled, who need to be upskilled. Sort of part of the populist revolution that happened in the recent election is all around people having anxiety about their futures. We're trying to help them. What more recently have added to our portfolio, partnering with employers. And so employers now represent about 25% of the total enterprise sales. And we are deeply embedding ourselves into some of the leading employers in the country in occupations and in industries that are relevant to the type of people we serve, which would be hospitality, retail, skilled trades, veterinary, high growth, middle skilled occupations, and employers that have that need for that workforce. That's kind of our sweet spot.
Okay, that's good. And those are the people who need the skills the most, really. So there's a demand there.
Yes, there's we think a very large underserved market that historically education institutions have kind of migrated away because they feel like those are at-risk populations, those non-traditional students. They may not be the right ones to serve. They have the hardest challenges in terms of outcomes.
So it's too complicated. They don't want to.
It's too complicated. And we have the opposite view that says that is an underserved part of the economy that is in desperate need of options and access and affordability. So we have some principles that guide our choices. One is we don't think anyone should have to go into debt to be educated. And so we don't accept any government money. We don't accept any student loans, so-called Title IV money. And we've created a solution that allows an ordinary middle skill worker to be able to afford to go to school and to pay as they go. And it turns out that actually creates a lot of value, both financially and intrinsically to the employers, because when the employer finds an organization that has the ability to both serve consumers directly, as well as serve the needs of them as a client, and then bring those together, that's a fairly unusual organizational or business model. And we've been able to do both, and we think that's part of the future of how we view the skills economy functioning. There'll be institutions that are world-class at serving consumers, world-class at serving clients, and then have the ability to fuse the two.
Wow, that's really interesting. So we are here today at the LearnLaunch 2018 conference,
Yep.
and you spoke on a panel about education in the enterprise. So can you talk to me a little bit about what is happening within enterprise education-wise?
I think there's three things going on. First of all, historically, if you look at corporate training dollars, most of the corporate training dollars have gone to white collar professionals, sort of VP and above. So if the corporate training industry is 120, 130 billion, 85% of that money has gone to that cohort. What we're starting to see, we're kind of at the inflection point of companies embracing the idea that you can democratize training down to the frontline worker. That historically has not been the place, or they spent their money and their time. So the first big trend is, how do we upskill the frontline workers? How do we upskill the operations workers and not just spend corporate spending on kind of the white collar professionals? That's one change. The second question is, can they make it economically rational to do so? Because these are not social purpose organizations. They're ROI driven, they have shareholders. We have proven time and time again that it makes economic sense to invest in that cohort of worker. They will stay longer, you'll be able to attract more of them at a lower cost, and ultimately have higher productivity. And I think more companies are awakening to that. And then the implication on the ed tech community specifically is that the infrastructures inside of corporations were never really engineered to serve the rank and file at scale. And so what you find is a kind of a mishmash of technologies, learning management systems and the like, and companies are really struggling with, how do I bring those together in a way that is appropriate for the type of worker that I now need to train, not instead of the white collar professional, but in addition to. And so the talk we had today was about interoperability, the challenges companies have in disassembling and reassembling their systems. How do you embed the business processes in there? What about the data integration? So there's a lot of complexity in helping to navigate on behalf of clients how they should proceed in light of they believe they can get an ROI and they believe the time has finally come to really serve that middle skill worker.
So what businesses do you think are really preparing their employees and helping to train their employees? I know I've worked for 3 different companies in my life, and I don't think either one had more than a couple weeks of training.
Yeah.
So I don't think that it's as common as it needs to be.
Sure.
So who do you think is a good example of the way that things should be in the workplace today?
Well, pick an industry that you probably don't spend that much time reflecting on, but if you look at the industry around animal health and animal hospitals, there are some very large multi-billion-dollar animal health, animal hospital companies that you as a consumer might bring your pet. A typical animal hospital has a veterinarian, of course, or more than one, and they have vet technicians and they have vet assistants. It turns out that the rate limiting factor to adding more animal hospitals for most of the animal hospital chains in the United States is not finding enough veterinarians. It's there are not enough vet technicians and vet assistants in the United States, which is a certifiable credential. And so if they want to grow their business, they're going to have to embrace, which they have, building a talent pipeline that allows them to support the growth of locations they have. And the constraint they have is there just aren't enough in the United States. So in our case, we've made that one of our verticals, as we call it. And I think today we support about 40% of all vet techs in the United States who are going to school now go to our school. And so we do that in cooperation with the employer. So I think the veterinary industry is an example of an industry that is somewhat niche, but turns out to be a very large market at the end of the day that's been very progressive. I think when you move from there in retailing, there are clearly companies that are awakening and really leaning in. I think Walmart is working hard. There's, of course, the famous Starbucks ASU partnership that's been in place for a number of years. That partnership is a very powerful one and I think has strong signaling value, but that was for people who are going to go to college. And what we believe is that college is a viable path for many, but not for all. And there needs to be other opportunities in the career pathways. And so while we offer college offerings ourselves, we think that cohort around the certifications and even high school, actually, it turns out high school is another major challenge that employers have because it's, as you know, there's about 30 million adults who don't have a high school degree.
Right.
There aren't really any leading companies you can think of that could serve the adult high school learner market. And it turns out that that's the biggest wage premium you could ever have. Going from no high school degree to a high school degree, I don't mean a GED degree, a high school degree is a 26% increase in your wage premium and it improves your health outcomes. So the larger narrative is employers are finally leaning into high school completion, certifications, associate degrees for that middle skill, and hospitality, retail, veterinary, and I think skilled trades would be the last one, are all industries that are recognizing that they have to do something economically, because that it's literally constraining their ability to grow.
I think that's a really interesting thing to focus on because I think a lot of people who drop out of high school don't think that they can go back. They think GED is the only option, and it's not like they're going to re-enroll in their local high school because that would be humiliating.
They're not allowed to. They've aged out of the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and they've aged out of the system.
Yes.
So it's good to know that there is an alternative because there's so many people who don't have high school degrees, and that really does make such a difference.
Well, I think the good news is that the high school completion rate in the United States for graduation is about 83%. It's the highest it's ever been. That's the good news. The bad news is that still leaves 700,000 or 800,000 people annually who don't have a high school degree. If you've aged out of the traditional system, there's a very big void in the market in that no one really has accountability for you. The traditional K-12 system is a public good. We all have responsibility for helping kids in K-12, but no one really owns, in the context of our society, the responsibility for the 22-year-old adults who didn't finish high school. There are social purpose organizations sort of smattered around the country, so people historically have defaulted to the GED. The problem with the GED is it's a high-stakes exam, which is not the learning orientation that a person who historically may have been challenged in school is best positioned to take. They are much better positioned to do a self-paced, as-you-go model that they achieve mastery and proficiency at a rate that's appropriate for them, that acknowledges their needs and learning preferences, whether it be academically or motivationally. And so there are a sub-cohort of people where the GED is a totally fine solution, but as a general statement, you're not going to solve and help the 30 million adults who don't have a high school degree through the GED program, because it's really not engineered for that type of student population. The good news is that employers are starting to awaken that they have not just a moral responsibility, they actually have an economically sound argument for helping to underwrite investment in high school completion programs for adults, because that gives them a talent pipeline. So for example, Church's Fried Chicken in Atlanta has 1,700 locations. If you want to be a manager at a Church's Fried Chicken, you have to have a high school degree. Well, they have people in the country today who are good standing people, have demonstrated high proficiency, but they're not allowed to be a manager. So Church's Fried Chicken's underwriting high school completion programs because that credential has signaling value in the workplace and then allow people to move on. So this is all around building talent management pipelines and really tapping into historically an underappreciated part of the labor market. And when you're in a full labor context, full market context as we are today, companies are being compelled to look at alternatives, and leaning in on middle skilled oriented training and upskilling is very much part of their talent management plans.
Wow, that's great. So how do you see this space growing in the future? How do you see the workforce development and professional learning space growing?
Well, I think you just picked up on a key word, professional. So I think historically, the workforce development system has contrasted with K-12 and in contrast with higher ed, that it hasn't always been led by folks that came out of professional backgrounds. They were typically social purpose oriented professionals who were very capable, have good acumen, but they had a different set of experiences. I think what you're starting to see is both ed tech companies and just talents in general being attracted to the workforce development system. And you're starting to see a rapid increase in innovation, lots of new models emerging, both commercial models, pedagogy, technologies. There's kind of an awakening to this gigantic market that's underserved that is in need of different kinds of solutions. So I think if you were to press pause, come back in 3 years and look at the workforce development system, particularly in the context of ed tech, you will see more and more migration to that part of the market, because K-12 has known challenges and risks, long sales cycles, difficult buying models in terms of school districts and the like. Higher ed has its own unique set of challenges, but it's this workforce development system that's a bit of the wild, wild west. And there will be leaders emerging in that market who will perhaps emanate from the original K-12 higher ed, or perhaps will be new to that sector and will kind of be disruptors in their own way. And I think you'll see a lot more activity there than anywhere else. I was on a panel last week in New York at a private equity conference, and the title of the panel was The Future of Blue Collar Education. In my experience, there's never been at a private equity conference a panel on blue collar education. Like, it's its own small seminal moment. So when
they don't care.
Well, because it's never been an investable asset class. Now it's becoming an investable asset class. In order for it to be investable, there has to be scaled providers, and there has to be some notion of what is the market and how it's defined and how it behaves. That's all part of this ecosystem that's evolving and rapidly emerging within the workforce development system. And so we see a lot of attention, both investors, technology companies, and the like, really going after how do I take advantage of the workforce development changes to drive commercial outcomes, better worker opportunities, and really social outcomes as a byproduct.
Wow, yeah, you're right. And where do you see these jobs? Like, what do you think the jobs that will need to be filled in the future will be?
Well, there's a lot of debate, and there's always going to be, as there always have been, these sort of people who have very doomsday views on, all these jobs are going to go away, and a third of the population is going to be unemployed. I have a slightly more.
The Earth could also fall off its axis.
We could get hit by an asteroid right after this interview, right? But I think the more pragmatic view is if you look at the jobs that are quote at risk from automation, most of the time we always say that the only job that's really gone away in the last 20 years is the elevator operator. All the same jobs still existed, and there's a whole new set of jobs, right? So what we do is we look at the flow of the work, and we say what parts of the workflow of jobs will likely have some sort of automation. IBM would call it cognitive augmentation. So we see is there's still going to be customer service reps. When you walk into McDonald's, you're still going to talk to a human being. There may be different tools and technologies that help them deliver the service to you, but it's going to be a combination of human factor and technology factor. And so what we're trying to do is prepare workers for a future where technology and digitalization is embedded in the workflow, and therefore it changes what they have to do and have to do it. So what that means for us is we have credentialed programs that demonstrate you have expertise in this industry or this job, but we also are doing soft skills training, we're doing digital literacy training, we're doing financial literacy training. So we're trying to build the whole worker, not just the person who has the domain expertise in that discipline. And we think that's how education is going to start. We talk about the idea of a skills library. So moving away from just traditional credential-based models to tagging skills, training for specific skills, that's what employers care about.
So someone who has the skills to adapt to any new job that comes up.
Yeah, any new job. Yes. If you think of the hierarchy of skills, there's a set of foundational skills on numeracy and literacy. There's a set of foundational skills on digital literacy and social sort of soft skills. And then that's your foundation. And those are transferable almost irrespective of the employment setting. And then as you move up the pyramid, you start to get more job specific and industry specific skills. We're trying to support people across the full continuum of that learning, from the foundation to the intermediate, all the way up to supervisory jobs in hospitality, retail, skilled trades, and alike.
Great. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I feel like I've learned a lot in these 17 minutes.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity.